Good evening, everyone. Thank you all for attending tonight's event. My name is Zachary Gradishar, and I'm currently a senior here at American University. I have the pleasure of being the chapter president for AU PRSSA for the 2021-2022 academic year. I want to take a moment to welcome you all to AU PRSSA's annual Icons of DC event. This is an event where we as a chapter put on every year. It would typically be done in person, but given everything with COVID-19, we are having the event online. As you all know, this is a very special event as we are honoring the 20th anniversary of the tragic events of 9/11. After the awards ceremony portion of the event is over, we will transition to a Q&A session where those of you in the audience can ask our guests questions. Feel free to post any and all questions in the Q&A tab throughout the event. Before we get into tonight's event, I want to take a moment to introduce my wonderful executive board, who I'm very lucky to be working with this year. Elizabeth John, Katie Nett, Festisha Bovell, Nicole Alfonso, Renee Jean-Baptiste, Margaret Lemma, Megan Keefe, and Scarlett Witterden. In addition to our wonderful e-board, we also could not achieve half the things that we do without both our faculty advisor, Gemma Puglisi, and our professional advisor, Anthony Lafaus. With that, I will throw it over to you, Gemma.
Thank you very much, Zach. I'm so honored to be your advisor, and thank you to all of the students on the e-board. You are extraordinary, and I'm so honored and excited that we continue this great tradition every fall. So hi, everybody. Welcome and spending this evening with us. What is the Icons of DC? Well, every year, as I mentioned, the chapter recognizes around this time people and organizations who have made tremendous contributions in the community and in the country. And I also wanted to, next slide, we also wanted to highlight who some of these past icons have been. They've included the NAACP, the American Medical Association, the American Nurses Association, the ACLU, who just celebrated their 100th anniversary last year, and of course, the Sentinels, who guard the tomb of the unknown soldiers and who also will be celebrating their 100th anniversary this year. Next slide, Catherine. And so this year, we want to remember the 20th anniversary of the 9/11 tragedy. As many of you know, this past Saturday, we remembered all those who were lost, and our hearts go out to everyone. We also want to remember our Eagles, our students and alums of American University who we lost that day. We have a beautiful monument on our campus to remember those. They include Peter Alderman, the class of 1999, Linda Gronhind, the class of 1983, John P. O'Neill, the class of 1974, Mark Schermeyer, the class of 1988, and Ernest Williher, the class of 1968. And now this year, we'd like to honor two extraordinary people who have done so much to help us remember those we lost. Our Icons of DC 2021, the Pentagon Memorial Fund, and the 9/11 Memorial and Museum. And now I'd like to turn it over to Elizabeth. Thank you.
Thank you, Gemma. AUPRSSA is excited to welcome this year's icons, Jim Lachek and Alice M. Greenwald. And now for our Icons of DC award ceremony. Our first awardee of the evening is the National 9/11 Memorial and Museum. Through commemoration, exhibitions, and educational programs, the National September 11th Memorial Museum remembers and honors the 2,983 people killed in the horrific attacks of September 11th, 2001, and February 26th, 1993, as well as those who have risked their lives to save others, and all who have demonstrated extraordinary compassion in the aftermath of the attacks. Accepting the award is Alice M. Greenwald, who currently serves as the president and CEO of the National 9/11 Memorial and Museum. Let me share a little more about Alice. As the chief executive, a position she has held since January 1st, 2017, Alice M. Greenwald is responsible for the overall vision, financial well-being, management, and long-term sustainability and relevance of the 9/11 Memorial Museum. From 2006 to 2016, Ms. Greenwald served as Executive Vice President for Exhibitions, Collections, and Education, and Director of the Memorial Museum. In this role, she oversaw the articulation and implementation of a founding vision for the 9/11 Memorial Museum, managing its programming, collecting, exhibition, and educational initiatives. Thank you so much, Alice, for being here with us. Alice, would you like to say a few words?
Well, thank you so much, Elizabeth and Gemma. Can you all see me? For some reason, my screen just went off, but there we are. First of all, let me thank you for this amazing honor. I'm really deeply touched by it. Here, I hope you can all see it. It's a beautiful, beautiful plaque, which I will hang proudly in my office at the 9/11 Memorial and Museum. You know, what I most want to say this evening is that the 20th anniversary is actually a tremendous milestone. You know, when we started working on the museum in May of 2006, it wasn't even 5 years since the attacks. And we were trying to imagine what a museum dedicated to telling the story of 9/11 and to commemorating the victims could possibly be like. And you know, at that moment in time, not even 5 years since 2001, it was actually impossible to imagine people coming into the museum without their own memory of 9/11. The event was unprecedented in its experience of collective global witness. It's estimated that 2 billion people, a third of the world's population in 2001, watched the events as they unfolded on that day, or in the endlessly repeating broadcasts that went on TV and on the radio all day and into the evening that same day. And everyone literally around the world was fixated on the same events happening in one place, whether they were there or not. It was unprecedented, it was collective, and it was global. And so we couldn't imagine people coming in without some personal reference to that event, bringing in what we in the museum business call the sort of the personal narrative that you carry into a museum. And you know, 20 years later, there's an entire generation that has no memory of this event. Either they were too young when it happened to remember it, or they were born, like I assume many of you, after the event. And you know, you have probably 100 million people who don't have that baked in ineradicable memory. For those of us who watched 9/11 happen, we will never forget where we were. We always have those images in our heads. It's absolutely permanent in our consciousness. But for the next generation, it is no longer memory, it's history to be learned. So we're at this moment of transition from memory to history. And that places a burden on the Pentagon Memorial and the 9/11 Memorial Museum and the Flight 93 National Memorial in Shanksville. You know, we have to think very long and hard about what is it that we want the next generation and future generations to know about this event. And, you know, I think, obviously, we want you to know what happened. People have referred to our site at Ground Zero in New York, the World Trade Center site, as the place where the 21st century began. And all of you are going to be inheriting the custodial responsibility for that century in a very short period of time. When you graduate, you will move into this world as adults and contributors, and the burden will be on you to move things forward. And so I think in order to understand the century you are going to lead, you need to understand how it began, why it began that way, and the repercussions of those events. But I also think it's equally important, if not more important, that you understand how we as a nation responded after 9/11. And this was 20 years ago. And 20 years ago, we came together as a nation. You know, members of Congress stood on the steps of Congress on the night of 9/11 and sang God Bless America together. There was no distinction, Republican, Democrat, whatever partisan divides there might be on the floor of Congress, they weren't there that night. In New York City, it was a different city. I mean, I can tell you, people stopped strangers on the street just to hug them. People gathered at Union Square and on corners of neighborhoods and just held one another and shared their grief, but also compassion and empathy, did not see distinctions between people. And that sense of unity actually fostered a sense of hope and the potential for resilience. I have to say 20 years later, that hasn't survived. It was all too short-lived. And I guess the question I pose to you as the generation coming up into adulthood, into responsibility for the future, is how do we get back in touch with what we call the 9/12 effect, that coming together, that sense of unity, that we were all in it together, and that the only way we were going to get through this was by supporting one another. I think we need to figure out how we get back to that, particularly now when we live in a very divisive moment, very polarized moment. How do we recognize what we share in common as opposed to what we disagree with one another? I think it's the only way forward. So I don't know how many of you have had a chance to come to the 9/11 Memorial and Museum. I hope you will someday if you haven't already. I believe it is a landmark of our nation, but also of the world. This was an event that happened to America, but it was actually a global moment. And 9/11 affected people from over 90 nations. People from over 90 nations were killed. They were 2.5 to 85 years old. They were from every sector of the economy, every faith tradition, every ethnicity imaginable. They were people just like you and me. And ultimately, the message of my museum, and I'm sure Jim's museum, ultimately in his memorial, will be that, mass murder is a completely illegitimate and unacceptable form of negotiation for political grievance. And we need to figure out other ways in this completely interconnected, interdependent world to figure out how to live together. So with that, I will stop it. Thank you again for this wonderful plaque, which I will proudly place on my wall. And I thank you so much for this honor. It's really very touching.
Thank you and congratulations once again, Alice. And now I'd like to pass it back to Zach to announce our next awardee.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Our second awardee of the evening is the National 9/11 Pentagon Memorial. The National 9/11 Pentagon Memorial is a national memorial dedicated to the tragic events that occurred on September 11th, 2001. All 184 lives lost in the attack on the Pentagon are represented by memorial unit benches. Surrounding the benches are 85 crepe myrtles, trees that will grow up to 30 feet tall, and the age wall, which grows 1 inch in height per year relative to the ages of the victims. The memorial is located just outside the Pentagon. Accepting the award is James Lachek, who currently serves as the executive director of the National Pentagon 9/11 Memorial. Let me share a little bit more about James. James Lachek became the full-time executive director of the Pentagon Memorial Fund in January of 2020. Working with the new board, his focus is to raise the funds to design and build the 9/11 Pentagon Memorial Visitor Education Center. After losing his younger brother in the terrorist attack on the Pentagon, Mr. Lachek became involved in the process of creating a memorial on the grounds of the Pentagon to honor the 184 men, women, and children killed there on September 11th, 2001. Mr. Lachek worked to establish the MPF, the nonprofit tax-exempt organization responsible for raising the funds to design, build, and maintain the Pentagon Memorial. From the earliest stages, Mr. Lachek served as member of the steering committee that helped guide the project's site selection and design competition, including the juried process to pick the final concept design for the memorial. Before I throw it over to Jim to say a few words, we wanted to take a moment to remember Jim's brother Dave, who lost his life due to the tragic events of 9/11. Jim, would you like to say a few words?
Sure. I too want to thank everyone for this award. It It's an honor to receive it on behalf of the Pentagon Memorial Fund. I'll hold it up a little bit higher. And I couldn't be more honored to be here with all of you today and share a little bit of my story. I think a lot of the themes that Alice talked about are very similar to what we're trying to do with the Pentagon Memorial Fund. When we first started this project, there was a group of family members who all lost loved ones in the attack on the Pentagon, and we created the Pentagon Memorial Fund to raise the money to build the memorial. And it was the first of the 3 9/11 memorials to be dedicated in this country in 2008. And at the time, we thought our work was done once the memorial was dedicated in 2008. And it was only a couple of years later that I remember giving a tour with a group of 6th graders, probably in 2009, 2010. So those 6th graders at the time of the attack probably would have been, 2 to 4 years old, but definitely preschool. And one of the design features of the memorial is that the age lines, like my brother was born in 1961, he's on the 1961 age line. It goes from the youngest to the oldest throughout the park, but these age lines are oriented according to the flight path of Flight 77 into the building. And I was describing how planes were flown into the Pentagon and into the World Trade Center towers in New York, and the plane that was headed for DC, the 4th plane, was overtaken by the passengers and crashed in Shanksville. And these students, these 6th graders, all looked at me and said, "What are you talking about planes flying into the buildings? These were bombs that went off." And that was kind of the moment that we realized that, as Alice had mentioned too, there's a whole generation that has no memory of 9/11, like a lot of us experienced it, or your parents experienced it. So that really what started us on our journey to build the Visitor Education Center. So we reconstituted the board. In 2020, I became the executive director of the Pentagon Memorial Fund, working with the new board. At this point, we've finished the design of the Visitor Education Center. It's also meant to be a conference space as well as part of our business sustainability program for the center. But the exhibit space on the first floor has all been designed, and it talks about never forgetting and always remembering what happened there. And it takes people through the different events and how we responded locally, how we responded as a nation, and how the world responded. So that idea of response and what Alice talked about is very important as well. And because when we go through the exhibit and you get out to the other side, we ask the question, how will you respond? What are you going to do? How will you remember this? How will you make sure we never forget? So I think it's a very important mission. We are, as I said, probably about 2 years away from construction for the Visitor Education Center. We have to wait till some roadways get realigned so that we can frame up our site. And there's probably another 2 years of construction before we open. But we're excited about where we are. We're excited about the progress that we've made. We continue to get attention and work to focus on a capital campaign to raise the money to build the Visitor Education Center, and look forward to the day we can open our doors and have a place where people can go after they visit the memorial or before they visit the memorial, because there's a lot of nuances to the memorial that are hard to understand unless you have some explanation of it beforehand. But I just wanted to say thank you so much for this award and this honor. I'm happy to be here and representing the Pentagon Memorial Fund, and appreciate the time and the attention spent spent on these topics. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jim. We really appreciate not only your attendance tonight, but also the wonderful work that you do each and every day at the National 9/11 Pentagon Memorial. Now we will be transitioning to our Q&A session, which will be monitored by Fisticia and Margaret. And with that, Fisticia, I will throw it over to you.
Thank you, Zach, and thank you to our amazing icons for being here tonight. We have so many great questions lined up for you, and we're looking forward to hearing your answers. The first question is for Alice. There's been a recent issue in the news regarding the families of 9/11 victims. They are asking for President Biden to release a report on the tragic events because they believe that the Saudi government had something to be involved with. Can you share any news with this regard? Can you share any news with us regarding this?
I have to unmute myself. I'm going to be so happy when we're finally in a moment where nobody says, oh, I need to unmute, but here I am. There has been for several years now a family-led lawsuit against the Saudi government because of a series of documents that have been held as classified material by the federal government, a certain number of pages of the 9/11 Commission report material that was never released to the public. And there was the sense that there may have been some form of material support by members of the Saudi government to individuals involved in the 9/11 attacks. And to the best of my knowledge, this is not something I know intimately, but I listen to the news like everybody else, and I understand that the first 2 pages of the documentation have been released, and thus far there is nothing that we didn't know. There's nothing that's a smoking gun of any kind that indicates that there was an official government response. But even the 9/11 Commission, which was an extraordinary thing, there was a family member advocacy effort in the aftermath of 9/11 to get Congress to create a commission to investigate on a bipartisan basis what happened on 9/11. And that was really extraordinary 20 years ago when this happened. And the 9/11 Commission report does track individuals who are Saudi nationals who had affiliations with the embassy in DC, who were providing assistance to 2 of the eventual hijackers who came in through LA and ended up in San Diego, provided them with housing and money, and they had trouble with speaking English, and I think they were, he was providing some support to them. So there is this sense that there is some connection, but thus far we don't have any definitive proof that there is a government of Saudi Arabia backing of the 9/11 hijackers. But this is going to unfold over the next several months, and it will be very interesting to see where it ends up.
Thank you so much, Alice. Margaret?
Yeah, so this question is for Jim, but you both briefly mentioned and talked about it. So Alice, if you have anything to add as well. Someone asked that, as you guys both said, so many of the attendees here were very young when 9/11 happened. I was only 1 year old, So what do you guys suggest students and younger generations do to really remember, but also to spread awareness?
Well, I think, like anything, we all need to be students of history. So I think that the idea of reading what you can, visiting the museum up in New York, I've been there. It's a wonderful resource to understand what happened. But I think that's what's most important, and then being able to share that with others because I get, and I'm sure Alice gets these things all the time too, these crazy emails that talk about, 9/11 didn't happen. It's a hoax. What are you, I'm not going to, donate to a hoax. And it's like, well, where did my brother go? Where did all the people up in New York go that lost family members? So I think it's important to be students of history and understand what happened here, understand the response at each of these different places. There was a lot of great, and I watched a lot of them, and it was tough to watch. National Geographic had a number of different shows this weekend about 9/11 and what was going on. So there's a lot of resources out there that either in the written word or on video that you can read up on and find out about it. Because as Alice said, this was a historic moment, a changing moment in our history. She said that, it started the 21st century in many ways. So we need to be aware of that. I personally have the perspective that my father was career Army, and we lived in Tehran, Iran for a while, in the capital when the Shah was in power. And I remember my mother saying, "You're not going to be an ugly American. You need to understand the different cultures," because I believe we're more alike than we are different. What do we want to do? We want to take care of our kids. We want to take care of our parents, and we want to provide for our families. I think that's kind of a universal feeling around the world. So that's how I look at things. And I think that's something that, you can be students of history and understand what happened.
Yeah, I would have to agree with almost everything Jim just said. 9/11 was a seminal moment in American history, but it isn't over yet. We're still in the aftermath of it. I mean, 20 years later, we just left Afghanistan, and you've all seen the fallout from that. And this is not the end of it either. It's going to have repercussions going forward. I think to be really engaged citizens of this country and of the world, you as a generation are going to have to study 9/11 and understand what happened, why it happened, who it happened to, and the ongoing impacts of it. That said, 9/11 happened to human beings. I mean, the thought that human beings who are not monsters, they're human beings, made the rational choice to hijack airplanes, to take our technology and weaponize it against us, and put other human beings, parents, uncles, aunts, soccer coaches, doctors, lawyers, neighbors, cousins, in the position where at the World Trade Center, they had to make a choice between burning to death or jumping out of a 110-story building. I'm sorry, that goes beyond any rules of warfare. It goes beyond any form of negotiation. It is evil at its worst. And I think that, I agree with Jim. I think the good outweighs the bad. I think we're more alike than we're different. And figuring out a way to get to that conversation without actually, putting human beings in untenable situations. And this could be you and me. It could be you and me. And that makes it fundamentally unacceptable. 9/11 was inconceivable. I mean, none of us woke up that morning and could have imagined what was going to happen. Actually, while it was happening, and I was witnessing it like 2 other billion people around the world, none of us could believe what our eyes were seeing. It was inconceivable. And, we have put it in a box, we've put it in chapters of history books, we've said it happened and we move forward, but we do have to interrogate what is fundamentally unacceptable about it. In the same way that one interrogates the Holocaust as fundamentally unacceptable, state-sponsored mass murder of citizens, unacceptable. So we have to figure out as a society, and I worry about my children and grandchildren. That's why I'm in this business. I worry about the future they're going to inherit. And it's the future that you're going to inherit. So we do have to figure out what 9/11 represented and how we move from here to a collective understanding that there are different ways, more productive ways of getting to live on this single planet that we occupy together in a productive way.
Thank you.
I want to add just two thoughts to Alice's kind of one. This is important. I remember getting interviewed one time and news reporter asked me, "Do you hate Muslims?" And luckily I had the presence of mind to say, "No, I hate terrorists," because Muslims is just a different form of religion. The second thing I want people to know, and this is part of the stories we're going to tell at the Pentagon, there is right where the plane came through the building at the Pentagon, there's a non-denominational chapel at the Pentagon, because there are many people of different religions that serve in the military. Every Friday, there is a Muslim or Islamic prayer service there at the Pentagon Chapel 50 feet, 60 feet from where the plane came through the building. That's what this country's about. That's what people need to know. And those are some of the stories that we need to get out there.
Thank you. I know a lot of people here, and me myself after this, we're definitely going to do some research and start reading and hopefully visit your memorials and everything. So Vestisha, if you can ask the next question.
Yes, thank you both for your answers. And we, like Margaret said, we will definitely be educating ourselves even more than we are now and making sure that we have this moment to remember these tragic events. Our next question is, how do you see the education system aiding in the fight to make sure that 9/11 doesn't happen again? Alice, would you like to answer, please?
Well, education is sort of, we always say that our mission is commemoration, education, and inspiration. And education is the middle word, and it's like at the heart of everything we do. So for example, this weekend, and actually on Friday, because Saturday was not a school day, we do something called Anniversary in the Schools. The museum sponsors this. And this year, let me just tell you that there's an increasing interest. Last year, we had 340,000 registered students in Anniversary in the Schools from all over the country. We thought that was phenomenal. This year, we're over 1.2 million. So there is this exponentially growing interest in what does this mean? How do I make sense of this? And this year, our Anniversary in the Schools webinar, because it's the 20th anniversary, and because 20 years is the span of a generation, we decided to feature individuals. We always feature people with first-person stories, people who either lived through the event, survived as evacuees or as first responders or as witnesses. And this year we decided to bring in predominantly people who were young when 9/11 happened, so that it would be young people talking to young people. And two of the individuals featured in this year's webinar were kids when their dads were killed. One is the daughter of a firefighter from the FDNY. The other is the daughter of one of the pilots aboard Flight 175, which was the plane hijacked and flown into the second building at the World Trade Center, Tower 2. The third individual is a young man who was a fifth grader at the Emma Booker Elementary School in Sarasota, Florida, where President George W. Bush happened to be that morning, reading a book to kids as part of his No Child Left Behind initiative, an education initiative. And I think maybe you've seen the image of his chief of staff whispering in his ear, interrupting him from reading his book to tell him that America is under attack. And the look on his face was something, if you've seen that photo, you will never forget. He understands immediately what the seriousness of what has just happened. Well, this young man, his name is Carlton Shelley, wrote in a journal that night. He's a fifth grader. He had to write in his journal as part of his homework or whatever. And he came back to our museum in New York and he read from his journal. He's now, 32 years old, but he was reading his journal and very emotional. It was very emotional for him. And what was fascinating about it was that this fifth grader him, was seeing in that moment the absolute imperative of service to one another as a response to this event. Service to each other, service to community, service to nation. He was in fifth grade. And lo and behold, he grows up, he graduates high school, and where does he go? West Point. He joins the Buffalo Soldiers, the historically Black unit of the US Army. He is deployed to Afghanistan. He lived his own fifth grade vision that what you do as a citizen is you provide service. He's now going to Wharton, he's getting a degree in finance, he works for Bank of America, but he's an individual who really lived out his understanding of what it means to be an engaged citizen and a productive member of society. And just hearing from him gave me, I have to say, a sense of hope. So when you talk about how this next generation can learn about what happened on 9/11, I think the way you want to learn about it is by hearing from the people who were there. It's one thing to read historians' compilations of the facts and the histories, and that's very important to understand all of that. But when you understand the human dimension of history, you understand it at a different level. And I think this is one of those events where we have the opportunity through the education center that Jim is building, through the museum in New York, through the interpretive center at Shanksville, you can learn what it was like for people just like you. And then you understand that history is not something out there. History is what happens to us. And when you see yourself in the history, that's when you can make change.
Was it my turn?
Yes, Jim, would you like to add?
Well, yeah, I was thinking of another story. I used to work at George Mason University, and a couple of years ago, when General Petraeus was coming back from Iraq, and this again, military story because I'm a military kid. He was doing a speech or presentation at one of our campuses at Mason. It's in Arlington, which is next to Washington, D.C., and it houses three schools: the School of Conflict Analysis and Resolution, the School of Public Policy, and the Law School. And one of the things that General Petraeus made remarks on, what he was saying is that we were in the midst of the Iraqi occupation duty, and he said that his soldiers, his officers, needed those three skills. So it was a different type of war and different type of that they were fighting, because they needed conflict analysis resolution skills, they needed public policy skills to be able to talk about what they were trying to do, and they needed, understand the rule of law. So again, the way we respond to things, our institutions are constantly evolving to try to take on these different threats. And I just think it's very interesting how that evolution takes place. So again, I go back, Alice said a great phrase: engaged citizens. That's what we all need to be, and understand what impact our actions have our actions as a country have on the rest of the world.
Thank you both for your answers. Margaret?
Yeah, so a few people are curious and want to know, what's been the most impactful or the most rewarding aspect of your positions? So you both can answer this one.
Oh, I would say that, you have tough days and you wonder, if you're going to raise the money, or you're going to get the thing, the education center built, or Alice was probably doing the same thing, or we ever going to get this thing constructed. And out of the blue, you'll just get an email from somebody, or you'll get invited to an event like this where people say, thank you for what you're doing. It means a lot. Or they tell a story about being able to come to the memorial and see the different benches and reflect upon what's happened. I think those are the things that lift you up. The person, again, Alice said it before, it's the personal stories, the interactions with people, and the impact this work has on so many people to help heal, because it was very traumatic for a lot of different people, and they're still trying to deal with it. So I just feel fortunate that I'm taking a lot of everything I've learned in my life to apply it to do something good. So I mean, how can you can't have a better job than that.
Yeah, I would have to agree. I mean, the sense that you are touching people at a very profound level is the most gratifying part of the work. And I'll just share two stories, and one is very highly personal and one is really highly universal. So on the personal side, when we opened the museum, we wanted to give people the opportunity to share their stories and share their reflections. And we had a recording studio set up, which has had to be on temporary hold due to COVID, because you sit in a little booth and all this stuff. So anyway, a couple of years ago, pre-COVID, a young man came into the museum and left a recording. And our curatorial staff would go through these recordings on a regular basis. And this one sort of rose to the top. And he was the son of a woman who had been killed on 9/11 in the Tower 1, the North Tower of the World Trade Center. And he had come on his 18th birthday. And he left a recording where he said, I needed to see the picture of my mom in the memorial exhibit, and I needed to stand before her and say, I hope you're proud of the man I've become. It was very personal to him, a place to come where he could have a moment with his mom, who he lost when he was a very little kid. And that really touched me, knowing that you're providing even one person with that opportunity was exceptionally gratifying, I think, for everybody. But then on the very opposite end of the spectrum to the absolute universal, a year after we opened the museum, Pope Francis came to New York. It was 2015, and he worked with the Archdiocese in New York, and he said, I want to hold a he called it a multi-religious meeting for peace. And he said he wanted to have it at the 9/11 Memorial Museum. So we hosted Pope Francis in a room called Foundation Hall, which is this very large space at the foundation level of the World Trade Center. It's 70 feet below ground. There's, foundational structure all around you. You're like in a space of urban archaeology, if you will. And in front of this one piece of the structure called the slurry wall, which was the retaining wall that held back the Hudson River when the World Trade Center was under construction in the 1960s, and on 9/11 was actually severely challenged when two 110-story buildings collapsed into it, and it cracked, and the recovery workers watched for 9 months, day in, day out, to make sure it didn't breach, because what the slurry wall was doing was keeping the Hudson River from flooding Lower Manhattan. And had that wall breached, you would have taken an already horrific scene of destruction and made it exponentially unimagined. And I mean, the subways would have flooded, everything would have been flooded. So it held. They shored it up, they reinforced it, they put anchors through it, they kept the wall up. And the wall became this symbol of fortitude and strength in the face of adversity. Like, as Daniel Libeskind, the architect of the master site plan of the World Trade Center reconstruction project, said, it was like, a symbol of our constitutional values, that we have the strength to withstand these pressures. And Pope Francis wanted to have a stage in front of the slurry wall. And on that stage were representatives of every faith tradition. There was an imam, there was a Buddhist monk, there was a rabbi, there was a priest, there was a minister from several ministers from various denominations, and Pope Francis, and they each spoke from their own traditions in their own languages. He spoke in Italian, and it was actually, I'm a Jewish girl from Long Island. I got to tell you, it was one of the most extraordinary moments of my life being there in that room, and it taught me something very important, which is that, in that space, which is at literally bedrock of Manhattan and, bedrock of ground zero, that ground zero is not just a place where terrible things happen and where there's a cataclysm, which is the actual definition of ground zero, a nuclear explosion of some enormous amount of just sheer destruction. But it's also the place you start again. It's the place you build up from. And that's what he was talking about. That's what he was saying, is that, we can do it together, and we're only going to get there if we do it together, and we need to respect one another, but actually we're all talking about the same thing. So let's work together. And that was really his message. And I think in the end, that's what both Jim's and my project are about, is that, we attest to the destruction, we commemorate the loss that is fundamental to what we do as memorial institutions, but we also affirm that, you build up from here, and you have the opportunity to make it different. So I implore you, it's up to you. You're next up at bat, and you can make a difference.
I was just going to say, Alice, that I've been at in that foundational room, and I think I was there at the dedication of the museum.
That's right.
And I remember telling my wife, because I felt like I was in an underground cathedral. So the fact that, and I'm Catholic, so the fact that the Pope was able to be, and I've seen that slurry wall, and that is definitely a symbol. If you guys go, you've got to go see this place, because Alice is right. If that wall hadn't held, the whole lower Manhattan would have been flooded. And you look at this wall, and it just, there's a lot of meaning in it. And I would encourage anybody to go just to be in that space. It's a wonderful space.
Thank you guys so much. Truly, the work you do is amazing, and we're really thankful for all of it. Asticia?
Thank you both. Our next question is, how do the events from 9/11 affect you to this day? And how do you personally move forward, but also never forget? Jim, would you like to start?
I'll start. I mean, this has been a very different time for me, this leading up to the 20th commemoration. I'll tell you why, because in one role, I'm executive director of the Pentagon Memorial Fund, the business person, and having to run the organization. But then I'm also Jim Lachak, who lost his brother, the family member. And that was the tougher than I can remember in previous years to balance, between those two roles. And that was tough this year. But again, you go back to, I told my sister-in-law this, and her Dave's wife and his two kids, that the best, I always struggle with what to say to them after they lost their father. And what I came up with is, you're doing exactly what Dave would have wanted you to do, which is go on and live your life, be happy. Don't forget, we want to remember, what we lost. We want to remember our loved ones, and we want to remember that feeling of unity we had in this country. But we also want to go on and live the best life we can of service or doing the projects that you can. And I think that's, and I came around to that after seeing them, on 9/11 at Dave's memorial unit or his bench after the ceremony. And again, I just feel so fortunate to be in this role, to do this work. Part of what we want to do with the conference center is have lecture series, symposiums, have discussions about some of these things. And that's what I think is important, to have conversations and to listen to each other from different walks of life, from different religions, whatever it is. And so I think it's enough said. I'll turn over to Alice. I can ramble on forever. I apologize.
Again, I think, Jim and I are in the same business, and we think the same way. I don't think an individual or a society can move forward without honoring memory. I just don't think you can. At the World Trade Center site, there's redevelopment. There are new office towers. There's a new transportation hub. It's quite extraordinary. There's a performing arts center under development. You've got retail. You've got all of this sort of resilience and renewal and, new construction. But at the heart of it is 8 acres of lower Manhattan real estate, which is a significant amount of real estate in lower Manhattan, dedicated to memory. So what is that about? It's that you actually have to do both at the same time. And, I think about Elie Wiesel, the great Holocaust writer and Holocaust survivor, philosopher, novelist, who wrote, he said, if I stop remembering, I stop being. In other words, I can't be a human being if I don't remember. So there's an imperative that makes the assumption that we can be better human beings if we actually know history, if we remember what came before us, if we remember the people who came before us. That defines who we are. You don't start from nowhere. You start from where you came from. So it's essential to remember. And I think that ultimately, that's the most important lesson of these memorial sites, is that they don't provide answers, but they open a space for reflection and for questions. And that allows you as a human being maybe to grow into a better human being.
Thank you so much for your answers. Margaret?
Yeah, so we just have a few more questions left. Someone wants to know, what do you guys plan to do in the future with your organizations and what you want to achieve next?
Mine will be easy and quick. We want to get the Visitor Education Center up and running, and to be able to join the conversation and talk about all the great things that Alice was talking about. I think if you remember anything, remember what she just said. If you stop remembering, you stop being. So that's my goals. Very clear. It's raising the money for the capital campaign to get the memorial or the Visitor Education Center built to complement the memorial. There you go. There's some pictures. See, school kids, where it's going to be, near Arlington Cemetery. What else there? Lobby space when you come in. Vent space upstairs for conferences, and it just makes it a lot easier to get to the Pentagon Memorial from that spot, as opposed to where people have to come from now, going across a big parking lot in the Pentagon. So turn it over to Alice.
That looks great. I'm excited. This really looks beautiful. So we've built the museum, and we're doing a lot of programming on site. But I would say as we move forward, in addition to the educational programs like Anniversarying the Schools to reach out to a next generation, there's two areas of focus that I think will become increasingly more important to what we do and what we're about. And one is we do professional training programs right now. And right now we're working with intelligence agencies, with law enforcement, and with the military. And for the most part, we are speaking to recruits and probees and new agents and analysts. And they are 23 years old, 24 years old, 25 years old, 26 years old. They do not have a memory of 9/11. And the FBI has now made this a mandatory program. Every entering agent and analyst has to come to the 9/11 Memorial and go through this program. And why is that? We are not training them to be FBI agents. I can tell you that is not our expertise, but what we are able to do is to tell them something about the organization they are now beginning their careers in. And the FBI is not the same organization post 9/11 that it was pre 9/11. Pre 9/11, it was federal investigatory law enforcement. Post 9/11, it's about counterterrorism. And that shift was because of one event, 9/11. So unless you understand 9/11, you cannot fully understand the mission and the purpose of the organization that you are entering in as an agent or an analyst. This is true of so many of these agencies and organizations, including the military. So it's a program that actually creates a kind of emotional glue for young professionals to understand why they're doing the work they're doing and who they're doing it for. And I think that's going to increase in importance going forward, and also probably expand, because it really ultimately is about crisis leadership. We could move into almost any economic sector, whether it is finance or journalism. And there were actions taken on the day of 9/11 that are case studies in leadership. The Wall Street Journal was on Wall Street. Hello. Wall Street is 2 blocks south of the World Trade Center. Their offices closed on 9/11. They ran for their lives. They kept the paper going. Okay. They went up to the Upper West Side to the apartment of one of the editors. They put the paper out that day from an apartment. Okay. There was a sense that we have a job to do. You had organizations, businesses like Cantor Fitzgerald that lost, just an extraordinary number of people on 9/11, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of their staff and colleagues and friends. And yet they found a way to continue, and not only to continue, but to provide for the families who lost loved ones and provide healthcare for 10 years for those individuals. So the responses in a moment of crisis and in the aftermath of crisis are very telling. And they are great case studies for how to be the best human beings we can be, no matter what business you're in, whether it's law enforcement or journalism. So I see that as a major new avenue for expansion of our educational programming. The other area, and I actually wish it wasn't needed, honestly, it saddens me that this is something that we can do. But in the aftermath of 9/11, it seems to me our world has become much more vulnerable to extreme violence. You know, when my kids were in school, they did not go to school worrying about whether there would be a mass shooting that day. I didn't worry about it when I was in school. I didn't go to synagogue or theaters or concerts worrying, could something happen here? Just wasn't part of my life experience. And we know, sadly, tragically, this is now more the norm than the exception, that no place is safe anymore. Well, that is totally unacceptable, but it is a reality we live with. And there are communities around the world who have experienced situations of extreme violence, and in the aftermath of those moments have had to grapple with, what do we do to commemorate? What do we do to teach about this? How do we manage this moment? And they've come to us and said, help us. And this started, honestly, with the Boston Marathon bombing, and our chief curator was called by the archivist of the city of Boston, who said, I don't know what to collect. There are flowers everywhere. There are shoes everywhere. There are, tribute. What do I keep? What do I throw out? What do I do? He was overwhelmed, and she flew up to Boston and she spent 3 days with him and helped him begin the process of discerning what he would need to keep for the archives of the city of Boston of that event. Subsequent to that, we've worked with communities in Newtown, Connecticut, Orlando, Florida with Pulse, Charleston, South Carolina, Santa Fe, Texas, Manchester, England, Oslo, and Utoya, Norway. I mean, it's just, the list is far too long and tragic. But what we have learned is that, sadly, we have developed an expertise in commemoration of extreme violence and in figuring out how you educate about it. And if we can help other communities move through these terrible moments, that is something that we want to do.
Thank you both. Fastisha?
Thank you so much for not only your answers, but all of the amazing work that you do. Is there anything else you'd like to share or leave final thoughts?
I mean, I would just say the most important thing is to see yourself in other people, even if you disagree with them. They're still human beings. And fundamentally, the minute you stop seeing them as human beings, that's when the trouble begins. So try to see yourself in them.
I would add to that, just listen first, which I have a hard time doing, according to my wife, but it's a good skill to have. But yeah, no, Alice said it right. It's see yourself in others and put yourself in their shoes, walk in their shoes first. I mean, that's the key to being able to work with people, is just to understand where they're coming from, what their perspective is, and try to have a conversation about it. It's good advice.
Thank you so much. We will definitely keep that in mind. And now I will pass it off to our president, Zach, to close us out. Thank you.
Thank you, Fastisha and Margaret, for monitoring that wonderful discussion. And thank you to those of you in the audience who posed questions. I just wanted to take a moment to congratulate again both of our wonderful icons, Alice and Jem. You both are doing such great work, and we're so honored that you have taken the time out of your busy schedules to speak to all of us tonight. I also wanted to thank everyone in the audience for attending tonight's event, and special shout out to Matt, who helped put this event together. As president, I think I can speak on behalf of AUPRSSA in saying that we truly appreciate it. I hope you all have a great rest of your evening. Thanks again for joining us.